Welcome to the 1CA podcast. This is your host, Jack Gaines. 1CA is a product of the Civil Affairs Association and brings in people who are current or former military, diplomats, development officers, and field agents to discuss their experiences on ground with the partner nation's people and leadership. Our goal is to inspire anyone interested in working the last 3 feet of foreign relations. To contact the show, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com or look us up on the Civil Affairs Association website at www.civilaffairsassoc.org. I'll have those in the show notes.
Welcome to One Civil Affairs Podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Brian Hancock, and I'll be your host for the session. Today we have with us Colonel Brad Hughes to discuss innovative training for civil affairs functional specialty teams, or FXSP, building partner capacity, and military governance experimentation. Colonel Hughes, welcome to the show.
It is great to be here, and I am excited to talk about civil affairs and specifically initiatives with the 38 Golf program.
Oh, outstanding. That is one of the greatest developments that's happened to civil affairs in a long time, and there's a huge appetite out there to hear more about that, and I know you will definitely do that justice. I've had the pleasure of working with you. Some in the audience haven't. Let me tell everybody a little bit about you. Colonel Bradford Hughes is a 38 Golf military government specialist, often likes to refer to himself as Brad. He is skilled at building partnerships, articulating a vision, and positioning value. As a former Master Army aviator and UH-60 maintenance test pilot, he led multiple combat and humanitarian relief deployments across the world. Colonel Hughes serves as the government functioning specialty chief of the 351 Civil Affairs Command in Mountain View, California, where his team employs civilian-acquired skills and operates in the interagency intergovernmental environment to deepen the influence across the Pacific. He is also a certified gender advisor, leading efforts with the command to mainstream gender perspectives into planning and operations. Just a quick reminder to the audience that all the remarks by Colonel Hughes and myself are solely ours. All right. Now, it's been several years since we have worked together. You apparently have been very busy there building an amazing functional specialty team at 351 and developing the 38 Golf program.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment and really thank the previous commanding general for the 351st Civil Affairs Command, Brigadier General retired Chris Zubek.
Yeah.
His focus was getting civil affairs capabilities across the international date line so we can execute in the Pacific. With our new CG, that's Brigadier General Brian Fortin, I think we've achieved this, and we are working towards refining how we engage and truly leverage the value proposition of Army Reserve Civil Affairs. And also wanted to give a shout out to Colonel Chris Cray and his 364 Frontier Civil Affairs Brigade and his team's work with Pacific Frontier 24.
Outstanding. Good things happening everywhere. The Pacific is the biggest place. Indo-PACOM, the largest combatant command. And unfortunately, it's not full of countries that are all identical. In fact, they're all unique. So it's a very challenging problem set. Love to hear what's going on. I know we're going to be talking more about that. For those who are just tuning in, can you tell the audience a little bit about your role at 351 Civil Affairs Command as the functioning specialty team chief? What's a duty day like for you?
It's important to bring in what I do in a civilian capacity and do consider myself an entrepreneur. I direct operations for an all-on-demand helicopter charter company. We serve an interesting portfolio of clients from Tesla and University of Texas Athletics. There's another hook 'em for you, NASCAR, and even the San Antonio Spurs. So I also do work as a technology transfer consultant, where I provide clients with intellectual property management, and we make market-based recommendations. I bring that up because the cross-cutting component really between my civilian and military roles is that I think I'm competent at identifying trends and seizing opportunity. And with that, the opportunity to advance civil affairs, the enterprise at every opportunity is incredibly important. Pour myself into recruiting and retaining top talent, I like to think I function as a brand ambassador. I strive to build readiness by developing innovative opportunities that build cross-component, joint, and combined synergy. And all efforts lead to continued refinement of the government function specialty team, FXSP interoperability across KCOM, use of KPOC, and unified action partners. So together, that's what gives me great satisfaction.
And that's a critical mission. And I also love the way that you brought up the critical civilian skill sets that are required here, whether it's large-scale combat operations, COIN, operations other than war. There is a desperate need for us to interface effectively with host nations, civil authority. That's where strategic victory lies. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And you have just impeccable civilian credentials. I really wish on our board process that they would consider our civilian credentials as reservists, but perhaps something for human capital management in the future. But certainly they're essential for a 38 Gulf.
Of course. And, I think we'll talk a little bit about this towards the end, but getting back to the Gulf program, it's currently structured with multiple skill identifiers. There's 18 of them that target specific skill sets nested within various government function specialty areas. So these can range from commerce to archivists, transportation, and everything in between. So the Gulf program is a Army Reserve program that complements the active component. And military government officers, yes, subject matter experts, they're technically qualified, they're experienced, and a little bit of the company line here. They advise, enable, and assist commanders, and importantly, direct civilian counterparts with stabilizing and providing governance expertise. One thing I've always stressed is I think that capability should reside at the KCOMs just based on strategic significance of the Gulfs, but there is force structure down to the battalions. But again, the 351, we try to pull that capability up to the KCOMs. I think that's where we can truly leverage the expertise of the Gulfs.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know Brigadier General Zubik, who has recently departed, he developed a plan for digital reconnaissance, digital reach back, leveraging some of those capabilities at Echelon.
For sure.
So it makes sense to house things there, especially if there's a capability that can be delivered in time and space as required to all of the maneuvering elements. So that makes good sense to me. Let me ask you a little bit about this. I've had the pleasure, working here at a 4-star command. Lieutenant General Jody Daniels comes by periodically. Sometimes she does a town hall. Other times she presents new information. One time she came out and talked about one of her recent publications. Very, very interesting. A very accomplished senior leader. And one of the things that she's been saying is she wants our TPU, our troop program units in the reserve, to conduct novel training and to experiment. She's not married to the traditional 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year type of battle assembly format. Now, I understand that you have done something with that at 351, that you've embraced that opportunity. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your efforts there? And, if you're willing, share some results.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that resource allocation, to me, is negatively impacting Compo 3 or Army Reserve culture. As I mentioned, the Gulf program, we recruit experts from across the country, and we may have somebody on the East Coast that's interested in what the 351 is doing in the Indo-Pacific AOR. But because of the reduction in resources, I think many are starting to feel a little bit underserved.
Yeah.
And because of these reductions, we've acknowledged the challenges, and now we collectively, our team comes to Mountain View once per quarter, and we call that a traditional non-battle assembly approach.
Yeah.
We feel that this approach may become the norm for both use of KPOC and really across the Army Reserve. And I could get into the blocking and tackling of it. We look at it as a 3-legged stool organized around fiscal year quarters. So looking at the 3 months per quarter, month 1, we come in for mandatory collective training. And that's where we come in for the non-negotiable training event. So think ranges, ACFT, things where we need full-time support.
Right.
And we have some of the non-negotiable FXSP events like heart training, disaster management. JHOC is through USAID.
Mm-hmm.
That's month 1. We hit those non-negotiables. Month 2, And I think collectively we learned coming out of the pandemic that individual readiness, professional development, things like that are easier to accomplish at your home of record. It doesn't make sense to come to Mountain View to do an SGLV or DD93
Right.
PHAs, stuff like that. You can get after that at the house. So,
Well, isn't IPSA supposed to make that go away?
that's a good question. I will defer.
I'm still waiting.
I've got to defer to the human resources experts for that. But while you're at the house, continuing education needed for professional credentialing, networking, knowledge building, all that stuff can be done at the house.
Mm-hmm.
Or research tasks. I think you spotlighted that a little bit. Initiatives or projects that we're trying to advance. And then quickly, the month 3, we call it EPO driven. So an EPO is an exercise planning officer or NCO.
Uh-huh.
And either he or she will make a determination on the location. So we assign an EPO to an exercise or engagement, and it's that person's responsibility to do everything required for theater entry to get that team downrange. So the EPO is going to make the call, hey, does that bring us to Mountain View?
Yeah.
Where we need full-time support or access to systems, or maybe an alternate location to secure official passports. There may be SIP or SARNet access someplace else other than Mountain View where it makes sense for the team participating in whatever the exercise or engagement is to go there. Stakeholder coordination as examples. So 3-legged stool broken down by fiscal year quarters. That's how we're getting after it.
That makes sense. I was worried you were going to hit me with Colonel Like's ends, ways, and means on that stool there, but glad that it went in a different direction. And thanks also for mentioning the importance of the government passport. Many folks out there in the military, at least in Compo 3, don't have the opportunity to travel as far and wide as some of the civil affairs soldiers do. And, many of the nations they're going to, a government passport is actually not required. But many countries, especially some of these small island nations in the Pacific, most of Africa, et cetera, you're not going to get there on a government mission without a government passport. And I know that you cracked the code on how to get that. So your folks are, particularly if an emergent mission comes up, I can send a team pretty fast, can't you?
We can, and we cracked the code last year, and then things change. I will tell you that the majority of team members have their passports, but then we'll get caught up short with a visa requirement. And suddenly we've got to expedite that in order to get the team downrange.
Right.
I will mention too, just as a cost savings measure, we'll also encourage team members to drill with neighboring units. So National Guard in Arizona, they may be conducting an ACFT. We have soldiers who are close. They'll go there and execute. And it also allows us to broadcast the capabilities of the 38 Gulf, whether it's to the Guard, other Compo 3 units, active duty. So we look at it as an opportunity for folks to showcase their expertise to a new audience.
And that's fantastic. As you're well aware in civil affairs, we don't have lieutenant level positions.
Right.
We're always having to take folks from an entry MOS and invite them to the team and get them to cross over. So it's fantastic that you're spreading, evangelizing the awesome mission that we have. It's amazing when you tell people the things that you get to do at Battle Assembly as a civil affairs soldier versus the things that they do. Oftentimes the program just sells itself.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think the money situation is getting any better. And we'll continue with this non-traditional BTA approach. It's working for us. And I really think it's going to be the new model.
Outstanding. I suspect we're going to see more of that from other units moving forward. Let's switch gears for a second. I know many of the folks in the audience are not aware of that secret gem for training we have in Compo 3, known as Innovative Readiness Training, IRT. I understand that the 351 Civil Affairs Command actually has been heavily involved in the IRT program and a number of missions. In fact, I believe your team has even won some awards for IRT missions. Can you tell the audience out there, what is an IRT mission? How do you access that? How do you find those opportunities? And who can participate? For instance, can U.S. Marine Corps Civil Affairs participate in IRT missions? Can non-civil affairs units who may be listening to this podcast, can they take advantage of IRT missions?
I think IRT is open to the reserve component writ large. So Compo 2 and Compo 3. And I think, don't hold me to it, but I think it's also open to other reserve formations. So yeah, the Marine Corps could be the Navy, Air Force, but it is a reserve activity. And the Office of Secretary of Defense, OSD, has established the Innovative Readiness Training Civil Military Partnership Program. We call it IRT for short. And for us, civil affairs, it offers us to exercise government function specialty METs, so the things we need to train on and enhance readiness. And like you mentioned, we first caught wind of IRT in 2020, so in the throes of the pandemic. And there was a community in the Aleutian, specifically the community of Unalaska, that wanted to bring in civil affairs practitioners to do an assessment of their community. Kind of a commerce play. The community was divesting or wants to divest from fishing and also try to leverage the national security implications of that region. So we went there in 2020, and I appreciate the shout out. We did win an award that year for the Civil Military Partnership of the Year. And now we're back this year, FY24, and the Arctic and Russia, China, and the United States have considerable interest in the region and the expansion of northern sea routes. There's a nexus there for cooperation or a flashpoint for conflict. So that's why we're there. And we're focused on the central importance of Alaska and the Aleutians,
right?
The critical role of infrastructure in the great power competition. And it's really being viewed through our lens as government function specialty practitioners.
Speaking of conflict, while you were there, I seem to recall I saw a news article and also some imagery that Russian naval units actually came into the territorial waters of the Aleutians there and forced our American shipping out of those waters so that they could conduct military exercises. So it seems like not only do multiple nations have interests there, some of them are being pretty aggressive in that space.
And the activities by those players, our competitors, really have the community concerned and other, stakeholders larger than Alaska, obviously. And we're there to provide them the direction. They're challenged with governance. It's just interesting in that region. It's very tribal.
Yeah.
We were invited by the Kwajalein tribe. It's a native tribe in Unalaska, and they collaborate with the city. So you've got the city and how it's organized, and then they also have a corporation. So they call it the Tri-Lat. And from a governance perspective, we're there sharing best practices on how they can collaborate better. Mention private partner partnerships with respect to grant writing, finding financing, things like that for projects that they want to advance. We can help them realize some of those things. So it's been interesting. We were back up there in February of this year. I went on that trip. And then we had two of our energy officers there last month. And as a matter of fact, we had a call yesterday. They're working, when I say they, the community, on a interesting geothermal project that's tied to the Makushan volcano. It's an active volcano. Yeah, it's an active volcano, part of the island chain. They want to tap into that. So if that geothermal project is built, what does that mean for the Navy, for the Coast Guard? Would they be willing to establish more of a permanent presence? And that's something the community would like to see.
Given the activity of adversaries in that region, which I suspect is going to continue to increase with the melting of the polar ice caps, and that northern sea route is becoming more and more accessible, the Alaskan Coast Guard is overwhelmed. They have more disasters and rescues than any state in the United States by a good majority, plus a greater coastline overall to manage when you include the outlying islands. So they're heavily tapped. They're probably not going to be in a position to stop aggressive navies. And why I love the Army, I think we probably need some help from our friends in the Navy to keep our territorial borders safe there.
I think the community is really trying to position themselves as an attractive basing option for the Navy. And then with just a little bit more color on the IRT program, I think what we're doing as civil affairs practitioners is unique. Typically, IRT, you'll see it on the southwest border. You'll see it on CONUS-based tribal lands, it's nurses, doctors administering vaccines, or there could be small engineering projects, think building a road, something like that.
Right.
I think what we're doing, civil affairs, we're operating as a consultancy and we're providing impartial perspective, that second set of eyes that the community is interested in as they advance things that are important to know.
Yeah, outstanding. I mean, this is always one of the areas I was kind of a little bit jealous of the National Guard because they got to do a lot of missions to support American citizens within our own territory. But in Compo 3, we have that same opportunity here through the IRT program. And I know we're going to be hearing more about some of the successes of your team in that area in the years to come. Let's start with what every ground pounder loves to talk about, which is the role of the military in competition. I'm sure you saw February 10th, 2023, the Joint Staff published the Joint Concept for Competing. This was actually a landmark document as it represents one of the first publications in a doctrinal format which recognizes the conflicts that the United States and our allies are actually in and will be in for the foreseeable future, rather than the World War II style conflicts that we have built the force to win. Now, given the Joint Chiefs Title X responsibility, one would expect a host of changes across doctrine, organization, training, material, leadership, and education, personnel, facilities, and policy to come from this. What has actually happened is silence from the military community. Very little change has been initiated by this revolutionary document. The Joint Concept for Competing recognizes that the strategy of our adversaries is to win without fighting. So building large combat formations to go into blunt contact may not be the best investment if that is really their strategy. And when I think about this concept of win without fighting, I have flashbacks to that visual capital analysis video that you presented actually years ago at the Civil Affairs Association annual convention. And in the video, it showed how through trade agreements, economic investment, et cetera, China was reshaping the global order in their favor. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. It was innovation as a weapon system. And Brian, before we leave IRT, I've got to let the audience know that you were part of that initial engagement in 2020. And that award is just as much yours as it was the entire team. So if I hadn't, thank you again for that support.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
For sure. I'll try to frame my answer through a 38 golf lens. And really, you talked about the future. And as the Army looks to the future and considers its ability to perform military government operations, so that's what we do as 38 Golfs, the Army has got to embrace a pool of Golf personnel. This is important, who are civilian component oriented, culturally attuned, and engagement focused. I like to consider it a cohort of experts with a strong understanding of stabilization activities.
Yeah.
And I think that gets back to the winning without fighting. Today's military government specialist has the tools required to help the Army gain the critical governance support capacity it needs in the face of emerging challenges to the current global order and the geostrategic nature of the great power competition.
Yeah.
And this is where I know building and pushing the team to advance this critical capability is where I hold great passion. And I recognize that, this is the 6 inches in front of our face right now. And I think we've been successful.
Yeah. I know we're going to talk about some of those specific successes coming up. Continuing to talk about competition, we're going to be in competition 99% of the time.
Sure.
We both know that 99% of the military's resources, including the Army, is not directed towards competition. In competition, it's generally not acceptable to bomb folks. And the reality is in the military, it's often easier to drop a JDAM on something than it is to send out a text or a tweet.
Right.
That's something that I know we're working on. But if we're really going to compete, if we're going to defeat a strategy of winning without fighting, then we have to be able to inoculate civil populations to the type of mis and disinformation, the type of propaganda, the type of shaping, the type of casus bellis used to invite war. And that's going to require a lot of non-lethal capabilities, including what we used to refer to as information-related capabilities. within that construct, civil affairs is one of the few military capabilities that is actually optimized for non-lethal influence effects. But I saw you saw the latest R-Struck was published not long ago. And when I took a look at that, at least in the soft cuts, what I'm seeing is that the Army is continuing to buy up risk in competition by continuing its slow program of divestiture of civil affairs forces. We've lost, for instance, all of our Compo 1 civil affairs forces as of FY26. This seems to me to be a disconnect, actually, in building a force capable of defeating the enemy's actual strategy versus what we're resourcing. If you see a disconnect, why do you think that is?
It's unfortunate that civil affairs is unfunded to the level it is. And I like to think of, I've got to remain positive, and I like to think of the value proposition, again, tying it back to the Gulf program, and where we can realize that value proposition is building partner capacity. That is the vital tool for the U.S. to compete with great power adversaries. We are choosing to engage where adversaries do not. Mm-hmm. Security partnerships, alliances, as you just pointed out, they're unique and complex, adaptive systems. And you kicked off with this, especially with some of the smaller Pacific Island countries. We've been across COFA and we've seen that these countries display certain characteristics at the local level that are nonlinear, and they display system-wide emergent properties that our cohort, they have the systems-based expertise, we think at least, to implement building partner capacity through security cooperation, which contributes to the local and regional stability that we need to be successful in this period of competition. And it importantly adds credence to integrated deterrence. Mm-hmm. And that is the value proposition of the Gulf program and civil affairs. Again, we are obviously civil affairs practitioners.
Yeah.
That's how I think we can be good partners and have meaningful impact.
I'll let you continue that thought in 1 second. Then, of course, I'm going to ask you about some examples of some of those real world missions that you're doing to these small nations. I know the audience wants to hear about that. It just seems to me, though, that we are very challenged institutionally as an organization to understand what shaping is outside of lobbing artillery rounds. Because that's winning without fighting, right? That's Sun Tzu's bloodless ultimate victory.
For sure.
Is defeating the enemy first, then going to war, right? The non-lethal capabilities of which CA is in high demand. It's very popular, very well received by host nations and partners in most cases, is one of those few capabilities. And it allows us to do those invisible shaping fires of influence that lead to things like access basing and overflight that help us set the theater for conflict if it occurs, for robust alliances which are very powerful at deterring aggression. If Ukraine had been in NATO, they wouldn't be attacked and in so much difficulty right now. It's fantastic for generation of goodwill. It makes economic sense. All of these things have a nexus in positive, non-lethal influence. Now, with that said, can you tell the audience, some of which are going to be folks who don't necessarily believe in influence, they believe in hard power, what are some of the effects that you have seen from what amounts to non-lethal fires that you've been doing Indo-PACOM to generate positive influence for the United States and for our allies?
I've got 3 recent engagements as of this calendar year to talk about, but I think where our team makes money is we're able to identify a community-based organization who they're informal influencers and pick the country, right? And who's to say that when needed, one of these community-based organizations, they may have the ability to deliver results if ABO becomes an issue. I'm not saying that's the key. We're very local in some regards. And then, we're meeting with ministers and others, but we're trying to build relationships across the spectrum. And you never really know when you might need to cash in that relationship. So I think that's important.
Yeah, but you have to invest before you can reap, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm hearing your civil affairs teams are doing out there in the field.
For sure. And I think that also gets back to Compo 3, because we just stay on our positions a little bit longer. There's not as much churn as the active component sees.
True.
We're able to build these relationships, right? It could be as simple as a phone call or a text or WhatsApp to a partner in the Philippines, a partner in Palau, like, hey, how's it going? And that's meaningful. It goes a long way, and I think it goes further than a lot of people think.
This is episode 1 of 2. The second half will air next week.
Thanks for listening. If you get a chance, please like and subscribe and rate the show on your favorite podcast platform. Also, if you're interested in coming on the show or hosting an episode, email us at capodcasting@gmail.com. I'll have the email and CA Association website in the show notes. And now, most importantly, to those currently out in the field, working with a partner nation's people or leadership to forward U.S. relations, thank you all for what you're doing. This is Jack, your host. Stay tuned for more great episodes. 1CA Podcast.